Hey guys, Doctor Who is back! You remember? Doctor Who. You know, the one about the space alien who travels about the place in the magic blue box? You remember, with the statues and don't blink, cause blinking you're dead? No, it didn't get cancelled years ago, it's still going. And we'd really like you to watch it. Basically, you'd be doing everyone a massive favour if you watched it. I'm pretty sure that's the best way to get people watching a show. Make it a grim, resigned sense of duty. Please guys, it's really important you watch this season, because now that we're on a massive international streaming service, apparently if we don't get over a certain amount of views an episode, we get put in the punishment pit. Please watch us, yeah? Because apparently we need to rub the lotion on the skin or else it gets the hose again. Please watch us. Please help us.
Please come back.
So, when it got announced in 2021 that former showrunner Russell T Davies was returning to Doctor Who after over a decade, the question on everyone's lips, beyond rabid fanboy hype, was why? Did he have something new that he wanted to say? Did he just want to continue where he left off? Did he want to reinvent it for a new generation? From what I've seen of the show under his stewardship over the last couple of years, it appears to have been a mix of those three, because all of these motivations seem to drift around in random episodes, combined with something that only occurred to me recently after rumours the show's going on hiatus again started swirling. I remembered the 10th Doctor's final line.
I don't want to go.
Yeah. That's what this era ultimately is. The show's waning relevance in pop culture and existence primarily to serve an audience of hardcore fans at the expense of acting as a jumping on point for newcomers, combined with changes in mainstream audience viewing habits that the show couldn't help, has meant that it's been living on borrowed time for quite a while now, and only really still exists because franchises don't seem to die these days, and it was incredibly massive once upon a time. Rumours of a hiatus were swirling prior to Chris Chibnall's departure as well, which I was inclined to believe and would honestly kind of see as a blessing. And not for the malicious reasons that you might have expected of people anticipating a hiatus. Outside of the people desperate for something to bludgeon the other side with in the tedious never-ending culture war, people like myself who like to consider ourselves at least sincere in our criticisms have been saying for a while now that Doctor Who probably does need a significant rest period of at least a few years, because its formulas have started to feel tired and the discourse over it seems to now be more focused on the number of people still watching it as opposed to the actual stories that it's telling. And a viewership that's constantly at war with itself all the time isn't exactly an inviting one for anyone wishing to join in. A decently sized period of rest is basically inevitable at this stage, and it would be good for it. And yet...
I don't want to go.
And I don't either. I love Doctor Who, I genuinely do. I just have this bit of my brain that makes me feel automatically sad thinking of it not being there anymore, even though it's pretty obvious from the last few years of my channel that I don't actually think about it that much these days. Where I used to make Doctor Who videos somewhere in double figures on an annual basis, I now make between 1 and 4 videos about it every year. People used to come to my channel for the Doctor Who content and maybe stick around for the other stuff, now it's the other way round. I don't really need Doctor Who to be a constant presence in my life anymore. Even though sometimes what we want isn't actually good for us, I don't want to abandon Doctor Who completely, and I don't want the show to vanish. And I'd wager Russell had the same feeling that partly motivated his return. The only problem is that not being ready to see the show go, and reinventing it for a new generation, like Russell obviously knows the show needs, while these might not necessarily be mutually exclusive motivations, they are adversarial. Which is probably why those David Tennant specials and both seasons of this new era have been this weird mishmash of a soft reboot for younger, newer audiences, and throwbacks to Russell's first era and the classic show, never really settling on one thing or the other. And they don't always sit right together. You can't go, I'm a Time Lord from the planet Gallifrey, here are the basics for the new viewers, and then start jabbering about lore from 50 years ago. This is why I've been finding all these never-ending conversations about the ratings so tiresome. Oh, this episode got the lowest ratings ever. It only got 2 million viewers. Yeah, of course it did. Because Doctor Who has consistently been on the air for the last 2 decades and it doesn't have anything left to prove at this point, and the wider audience got tired of it a long time ago. The only reason the 60th specials did better than usual was David Tennant was back and it had the "ooh, remember that" factor. This is the biggest problem with Doctor Who that no one wants to talk about because the only solution to it is a period of rest and a format overhaul. People aren't just not watching it because it's shit now, although yes it is sometimes, as it always has been. It's always had shit episodes. They're not watching because of the simple fact that people get bored of doing the same things over and over again. And whether the show does do something new and interesting every once in a while, they see a trailer and a banner on a streaming service and they think, oh yeah, it's more of the same, isn't it? It's precedent and boredom that's killing off those viewers, and there's no turning the ship around at this point without a break. However, while it is still here, I do still want to engage in honest and sincere criticism of the show in spite of my distance from it, because I still have a high amount of respect for the franchise and the people that work on it. So, let's talk about it. First up, cast your minds back to this Christmas. Joy to the World. First off, the most impressive thing about Joy to the World for me is that it sets up a standard Doctor Who plot. There's a hotel offering dimensional windows to various places in time, where the Doctor is investigating this mysterious briefcase that controls people. Everything you'd expect from a Doctor Who story, and the whole idea to explain why there's usually a door in your hotel room that's always locked is just such a Stephen Moffat thing to do. The locked door in your hotel room is something that's probably occurred to you when you've been on holiday before, and he's written a fantastical explanation for it. That's bloody brilliant. But rather than continue the expected story beats, the Doctor gets stranded at a hotel in 2024 and he has to stop and wait until he can re-enter the time hotel. While any other episode might have just cut away at this point or done a quick montage and continued at the usual pace, we stay here for a while. And the Doctor befriends this lady who works there called Anita, and they have an actual friendly relationship. This was such a lovely surprise, and I was having such a wonderful time with it that I was kind of disappointed when he gets back into the hotel and the story continues as normal. This is the type of low stakes, cozy stillness that you never see in Doctor Who, and that's perfect for Christmas for me personally. The Christmas specials were always fast paced and bonkers, and coziness kind of fits the mood of Christmas a bit better for me. I really like this angle of the episode, and if the episode were mostly just this, I would love it. But of course it isn't, and that's where we get to the emotional counterpoint that kind of dominated everything else for me. It has become kind of inevitable at this stage that COVID is going to show up in sci-fi set in the early 2020s. Russell made this sci-fi drama called Years and Years back in 2019 that you might remember, showing us what the very near future would be like. And when I rewatched it a couple of years after its release, it felt off and weird to me because no one mentioned COVID at all, which would consume everyone's lives the year following its initial broadcast. Granted, most people seem to have forgotten that whole period by now, and COVID seems to have morphed into this crazy fever dream where we all need to get stuck in a lift and have a character turn to us and say, hey, remember that time when we all got locked in our houses for about a year and a half? That was weird, wasn't it? So it's nice having a character like Joy, whose life was entirely reshaped by COVID, who delivers a heartfelt rant on behalf of everyone who also had traumatic experiences with it, delivered with the correct amount of intensity by Nicola Coughlan, who really gives it her all and is honestly incredibly impressive.
She died on Christmas Day. She died alone! And those awful people in their wine fridges and their dancing and their parties, and I listened to them, and I let my mother die alone!
And it is a shame that my key criticism of this episode kinda comes from here, because whenever anyone brings up the fact that the people who devised lockdown rules in the UK threw parties where they drank lots and threw up everywhere in direct violation of the rules written in that building that said people couldn't visit their dying relatives in hospital, I had my own trauma around this time that I don't want to get into publicly, I get so utterly and completely furious that I can't think straight. This basically consumed the rest of the episode for me. Yes, I am glad that Stephen used the platform of Doctor Who to express his disgust over Partygate like this, but this is just too close to home for me. Because we didn't get an adequate apology for Partygate back then that didn't include any caveats or pathetic excuses, and still haven't. Which is why it still winds me up all these years later. I guess what I'm trying to say is that yes, I am the problem and not the episode. This is why the goal of quote-unquote objective criticism is difficult to reach at the best of times, utterly impossible when it's a subject like this. It's a shame, because in terms of construction I thought Joy to the World was pretty decent, but that's probably why it's not going to become regular Christmas rotation for me. Anyway, getting to the series opener, The Robot Revolution, in which new companion Belinda Chandra gets kidnapped by robots who live on a planet orbiting a star that her first boyfriend paid to have named after her on one of those name a star after you websites. This made me laugh, but it also immediately reminded me of a sketch from Mitchell and Webb's radio show from about 20 years ago.
It's from Alan. It's one of those things where they name a star after you.
Oh, yeah. Oh, they're so pointless, aren't they? I bet they just make it up. I mean, who's going to check which star's theirs?
Yeah.
Are you busy, President Zavijib? The sun around which our world orbits has been given its new name, Your Excellency. It is to be known henceforth as Claire Cooper.
Do we know what the weather will be like?
The forecast is for scattered showers with intervals of Claire Cooper later.
Not to say I think Russell ripped this off, of course, just I have an encyclopedic knowledge of BBC Radio 4 comedy from the early 2000s. This basic idea has probably been done before that, and I'm sure what if when people do that stupid thing where they name a star after you, the aliens revolving around that star now have to build their entire civilization around you, is probably an idle thought that's occurred to a million sci-fi writers over the years, and it's the kind of stupidly comedic idea that I would have expected of Russell. Douglas Adams is a reference point that every sci-fi nerd makes at some stage when talking about sci-fi comedy, but this specific story, in which a messy breakup with her first boyfriend about 15 years ago drags Belinda into the stupid and confusing politics of an alien planet populated by robots, that just is the sort of absurdly contrived thing that Adams did all the time. I was immediately reminded of Agrajag, the creature that keeps getting reincarnated and gets accidentally killed by Arthur Dent every time he's brought back as something else, and Arthur doesn't realise that he's doing it. I was reminded of Agrajag because of Belinda's story of being a random every person blamed for the stuff that happens on this planet while being completely oblivious as to why, and being made to feel guilty for something she wasn't even aware of. Which kind of fits with her story of this stupid sci-fi bullshit being an extension of her relationship with her overkeen, controlling first boyfriend. People like this will often blame their partners for stuff that they didn't even realise they were doing, and make them feel constantly guilty and on edge, so this really works for me. I know the Planet of the Incels line has stuck in the craw of some people, and yeah, it's a bit clunky, but personally I see this angle of the story as a natural extension of the story that was already there to begin with, and you'd have to be a terminally online participant in the culture war yourself to think this angle of the story is either forced or comes out of nowhere. Unless you are the sort of person who thinks that naming a star after someone is genuinely a romantic gesture, in which case I understand why you'd be upset about this. At first glance, Belinda is basically Russell reconstituting the Martha storyline in the same way that Ruby was a reconstituted Rose storyline. Ruby and Rose are both teenagers whose names start with the letter R and have storylines concerning an absent parent. Martha and Belinda, by contrast to Ruby and Rose, are grown-ups whose names end with the letter A. They have some kind of medical background, and they're the rebound companion story. Personally, while I liked Martha a lot, the start of her storyline in Series 3 always bugged me. Because the Doctor had this thing over her first couple of stories where he'd say, "I'll drop you back home next week."
A friend of mine, Rose, right now, she'd say exactly the right thing.
Still, can't be helped.
You're a novice, never mind. Take you back home tomorrow.
Treating her as just another one of my occasional companions. Like, depressed over Rose or not, it's a really unflattering look on him. Belinda also has this I'm not really supposed to be here story to her, but unlike Martha in those first couple of stories, she has a lot more agency. And it's really quite cathartic watching her recognise the Doctor as dangerous and tell him so.
You're dangerous. I am not one of your adventures.
I liked Belinda a lot in this episode. She doesn't worship the Doctor immediately, she's had a relationship with a self-centred bloke before, she's in her early 30s, she's been there, done that, and doesn't want any more of it. And the only reason she's still here in the TARDIS is because something's going on that means the Doctor can't drop her back home, which is the ongoing mystery of the series. Yeah, I'm very surprised to be saying this, but in this episode, Russell does a distinctive twist on the introduction of Martha and actually improves on it in the same way he tried to do something similar with Ruby and it didn't quite work in my opinion. Ruby was a retread of the Rose arc with tweaks done to it to try and make it different and refreshing, but those tweaks broke the story. A kid looking for their missing parent story doesn't work as well when their home life is presented as loving and positive. Similarly, my problem with Martha's story was that her getting wrapped up in the story of a Doctor who clearly wasn't over Rose reduced her agency. Having a companion who openly doesn't want to be there and recognises the Doctor getting attached to people, then briefly crying when they die and moving on basically immediately is unhealthy, and a sign that there's something dangerously wrong with him and he's not this happy-clappy children's television presenter that he appears to be, is genuinely brilliant. I mean, granted the show completely forgets this angle of her character for most of these episodes and completely and totally screws up the ending in every way imaginable and then some, more on that later, but during the telling him off scene, I was actually leaning in and was really interested. I was thinking, that's a bit odd. When a character the Doctor is supposed to have this history and plans with randomly gets introduced and dies in the space of about 2 minutes, thinking, that could have been paced better, because I watched that and I don't give a shit. But that's the point. The Doctor assuming that Belinda will immediately be interested in travelling with him is unhealthy, and Belinda's looking at him from a neutral perspective and seeing red flags. And in analysing this moment, something occurred to me. Is the Doctor a narcissist? I used to get annoyed at the show emphasising the Doctor's importance. That was the thing that grated on me so much about the 10th Doctor's era. But something occurred to me here with Belinda bringing up him crying over a random lady whose name fades from your memory the second that she's dead. Was that genuine emotion the Doctor was feeling? And if so, what was that emotion in relation to? The genuine investment that he had in this character as a person? Or the fact he can't use her to have further adventures that he describes with all this romantic, flowery language? Oh dear, I can't have adventures with her now that she's dead. How about you, Belinda? You're the next person in close proximity to me. About a week before I watched this episode, I watched this mini-series on ITV called The Widower, where Rhys Shearsmith plays a narcissist who kills his wife. And there's this scene after he's killed her where he's practicing crying in the mirror for when he's in public, and it looks convincing. But there's something wrong with it. There's nothing behind the eyes. He's imitating emotion, he's not feeling it. And I recognised that when I saw this scene and then Belinda draws attention to it at the end. Oh yeah! Someone I was supposed to care about just died. I almost forgot. What was her name again? Granted, prodding me into thinking about all of this probably isn't entirely intentional based on the finale, which essentially chucks all of this intrigue into a massive burning fire. More on that when we get there. But this scene in particular, prodding me into thinking what's actually making the Doctor tick, what's behind those tears, shows up again in the next episode. So, Lux might not be the best episode of the season, but it's definitely the most ambitious and probably the most impressive. When I saw this episode was about the Doctor and Belinda showing up in a movie theatre in the 50s in the US, my immediate thought was, how are they going to address the segregation? Because this isn't like the Rosa Parks episode. That's kind of a heavy topic that's probably going to sit weird inside a zany off-the-wall episode about a living cartoon character, right? Belinda obviously has an emotional reaction to realising the time period means segregation, but the Doctor shuts that down.
Right now, we are busy.
How can you say that?
I have toppled worlds. Sometimes I wait for people to topple the world. Until then, I live in it and I shine.
Which, yes, is calculated and pragmatic. It's what you'd expect of a time traveller. Because, you know, cause and effect, there are some things you can't solve just by going back in time. But it's the shutting down of the emotional reaction that I found interesting. And then at the point where the Doctor and Belinda get turned into cartoons, and they realise that they get more rounded when they get sad, he says this.
You were sad, and you became more three-dimensional. Oh, that's it! You acquired depth! Let me try. We can't ever go back to my planet, because Gallifrey is a ruin. My people are dead. Oh! It's working. I'm more rounded.
It's like he's treating his emotions like a tool. There's something artificial about this Doctor's portrayal of sadness, and that's really interesting to me. The lack of a normal human reaction happens again when they break the fourth wall and come out of the TV set and meet some actual fans of the show. You'd think being told he's a fictional character would invoke an existential crisis. If I found out I was a fictional character, I'd go, what the hell is happening? Oh god, I'm going mad. The Doctor's just like, interesting, so tell me about this blink. Of course, he is aware he's being played with by Lux at this point. He did just have that fake out where it looks like he's returned to the real world before he notices some continuity errors, which was really funny. Speaking of meta jokes, I kinda don't want to offer many critical thoughts about Lux, because if I go 7 out of 10 because of XYZ, I'd be playing into Russell's hands because he literally shows the fans doing that.
7 out of 10 because it gave away the ending in the middle and the villain's motivation changed.
And technically, it's puppets that want to be boys.
I felt this was Russell directly staring out of the screen at me and going, yeah, that's what you're like, isn't it? Pathetic. Okay, fine, I suppose I have to. Okay, conceptually, Lux is utter genius and probably should have happened last season to coincide with the start of the Disney era. Mr. Ring-a-Ding looks utterly breathtaking, and it's a work of complete technical genius so far removed from incidents like Space Babies that I do understand that they were probably focused so much on trying to achieve something of this standard, so in order to accommodate that, they had to put up with an issue that I had, where the beats of the story feel a bit stilted and on rails, and so I kind of felt like I was on a Doctor Who theme park ride. So we've arrived in the time period, we go across the street to this cafe and we get some exposition about the story, we go back over to the theatre, we introduce the villain, we walk up these stairs and meet the projectionist and have an adequate amount of time for him to set up his tragic backstory while Lux is walking up to us very, very slowly. Then he comes in and cartoonifies us and we start the messy meta sequence. I'm not saying the beats of the story don't make sense. I like the story of the projectionist's dead wife being brought out of the screen by Lux. It's a shame it's done through a montage. It would have been really nice if we'd had this as a full sequence. I suppose what I'm saying is that it didn't really feel like a batshit episode where anything could happen at any minute, outside of the messy bit where he goes animated and meets the fans. It felt very much like a specifically designed track, and each step of the story could only go in one possible direction. The imagery itself is batshit. It is appropriately cartoonish. What I'm saying is that when I was watching the episode, I was seeing underneath it and could blatantly see the points that Russell has plotted out on his whiteboard, and could predict basically everything that happened at every single point in the episode. By contrast, I recently rewatched the Dream episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Restless, which genuinely does feel loose and almost improvisational. It feels like literally anything could happen at any minute. Lux felt like a very specific set of things are set to happen in sequence, and that was my problem with it. Don't get me wrong though, I can kind of look past that issue because I understand the allowances that would have had to have been made in order to pull off something like this. See, I'm not a totally stern and unreasonable shithead. Are you listening to me, Russell? I can see you through the screen. But yeah, Lux is one of the more fun and inventive episodes of this era, and I do see why everyone went nuts for it. Next up we got The Well, which I don't know why everyone was saying it's a sequel to the Series 4 classic Midnight is a spoiler, because I don't really think that, remember that, is what this episode really exists for, and honestly after watching it, I kind of think The Well probably would have been better if it hadn't been a sequel to Midnight. The original Midnight was very tight and self-contained and left basically no room for any more stories after it, which is what I loved so much about it. It was this nice little enigmatic bubble of a story. It's basically an incredibly unique take on the stuck in the middle of nowhere and there is a monster campy horror B-movie, but in this case you don't actually see the monster. And don't misremember it here, the original Midnight is actually very campy. The pre-title sequence literally ends with this.
Taking a big space truck with a bunch of strangers across a diamond planet called Midnight? What could possibly go wrong?
The sequel only really shares the core idea of a creature hiding within a set of bad vibes. Midnight's entity has basically no physical presence at all, hidden essentially inside speech that gets repeated by possessed passenger Sky Silvestri. And it creates this foreboding atmosphere of paranoia among the passengers, driving them to the point of wanting to chuck both her and the Doctor out of the ship. In The Well, we arrive basically in the aftermath of a creature similar to the Midnight entity, driving people insane to the point of killing each other. There's one survivor who has this barely perceptible creature attached to her, and all the characters start arguing over how to deal with it. It's a similar story but with military personnel in place of random holidaymakers, and a different means of the creature's perception. And as such, given military people are more well equipped to deal with dangerous situations, The Well is a lot less misanthropic than Midnight was, where there's no indication that the creature has any kind of hold over the passengers. It just pushes them psychologically to the point of talking about doing something that would have previously been unthinkable to them. The creature has had a similar effect on Alice here. Looking at her and listening to her talk about her daughter, it feels jarring to think that this woman would have killed someone, even in self-defense. The source of the horror is more in imagining what the scenes of this entity driving people to kill each other was like, which is a completely different prospect to the source of the horror in Midnight, which acted as a sci-fi spin on being trapped on a plane for hours with loathsome people. A child kicking the back of your seat and screaming for snacks from the trolley, when suddenly you had the idle thought going, I wonder what would happen if someone just chucked that kid out the window, and then you shudder and wonder what's wrong with you. While there are moments of similarity in the story, like where Cassio and Shia have a falling out over how to proceed, The Well didn't really have to be a sequel to Midnight, because Midnight concludes that it turns out the real monster was man all along, because it's not really the entity itself that's the danger, it's the passengers. In The Well, sure, the monster drove people to kill each other before the story started, but for the story itself, the monster is the monster. Look, you can even see it. Well, sorta. You see it's there, maybe a bit? Alice isn't possessed like Skye was, she's a victim of the creature. Granted, this doesn't make the story necessarily bad as such, it's still a creature of vibes, it's still got that ill-defined quality where the source of the terror is this feeling that you can see something dangerous out of the corner of your eye. The main thing I liked though was that I still know absolutely nothing about the entity. What is it? How does it work? Why does it behave the way it does? Even though it is a sequel to Midnight, despite not really having to be, I do like that it operates differently now that it's 500,000 years in the future. The creature could be a descendant that's gone through 500,000 years worth of evolutionary changes. Hell, maybe it is the same entity the Doctor met all those years ago. It is basically playing with people like the original entity did, and I think it's a missed trick that Doctor Who, and most TV sci-fi for that matter, rarely features aliens that behave in, alien ways. Truly ways that we can't even understand. Imagine if they'd left the Weeping Angels as just these mysterious statue-like beings that can only move when you're not looking at them. Makes your mind wander to mysterious places trying to conceive of what it's like to be this creature. Space should be utterly terrifying because you don't know what's out there or what aliens could possibly look like. And this is one of those Lovecraftian beings that's beyond human comprehension. Love that. More of that, please. I did enjoy The Well a lot, but I don't really have much to say about it beyond it's a pretty good PG John Carpenter's The Thing, and obviously it's not a patch on the original Midnight. Lucky Day is up next, and I know I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb in the wider Doctor Who community because I felt incredibly deflated by this one. And this is kind of the point where a season that I was finding kind of interesting completely fell off for me and never really recovered. Most of that's probably because of it being a Doctor Light and the return of Ruby Sunday, so I was kind of anticipating a similar style to 73 Yards, which I do still love. And I was also made to think it might be similar in style because of this article teasing that there's an episode that will explore Ruby's PTSD, which, if that's what Lucky Day was supposed to do, the word explore is generous to say the least. It sets up the rough outline of the infamous Dr. Light episode from 2006, Love and Monsters. So this guy called Conrad had a brief encounter with the Doctor when he was a kid, supposedly sparking a lifelong interest in aliens and the unexplained. He grows up and runs into Ruby Sunday while she's travelling with the Doctor. He invites her on his podcast. He starts a relationship with her, following similar beats to Elton and Jackie before we hit the midpoint and it goes in the complete opposite direction. Conrad is actually an online influencer spreading a conspiracy theory that all these aliens aren't real and Unity using taxpayer money to fake alien encounters for some reason. Which is quite a clever inverse satire of conspiracy theorists in real life saying that reptilian entities are secretly controlling the world. Because Doctor Who's version of Earth has been invaded so often, people just accept, yes, aliens are real. So in this instance, you got these people saying actually aliens don't exist, and this secret government agency are covering it up. Tell the truth, Kate Stewart, they're not out there. The reason that UNIT is supposedly faking alien landings doesn't make a whole lot of sense, which fits because conspiracy theories about aliens famously don't either. The outlines of this story make total sense to me. Here is my one big massive problem though. I don't buy the characters at all. This episode pretty much exists for that midpoint reveal where Conrad reveals his true nature, but I really needed a lot more on how he went from point A, meeting the Doctor as an 8-year-old in 2007, to point B, being an inverse conspiracy theorist in 2025. Because otherwise I feel like the episode is less telling me a story and more looking at me and anticipating my reaction to it. It kind of feels like this idea probably started life as a 2-part episode where part 1 is about Ruby moving on after her travels with the Doctor and starting a relationship with this guy. And because she's still dealing with trauma from what she learned about how her mother was treated that caused her to abandon her outside the church, She didn't see the obvious red flags in Conrad, and the twist that he's using her is the cliffhanger reveal, and episode 2 does the context. But because we don't have nearly as many episodes of series to play with, it's all been squeezed into one. When I make the point that Conrad feels incredibly cartoonish, I know people are going to respond that real life conspiracy theorists are cartoonish, which yes is true. It's incredibly hard to believe that Alex Jones even exists and is a real person, and it's even harder to imagine his life's journey from the child that he presumably was at some stage, to him screaming about how they're
putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay!
But if I've had the first half of the episode telling me that Conrad is this Fox Mulder type character looking up the stars and wondering about the truth that's out there, and even having an actual encounter with the Doctor himself, I kind of do need the pivot point. Otherwise he's just going to feel like a cackling boo-hiss villain going, ha 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 ha, my genius plan to make you feel bad about yourself for trusting me has come to fruition. Ha 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 ha, you fell for it, Ruby, you fool. It's kind of a similar reveal to the end of Kablam from Series 11, where the warehouse worker reveals that he was the bad guy all along. I get that the point is to make me feel the rug being pulled out from under my feet, but if I don't then see a bigger picture beyond that might give this guy a reason to think the way he does, even if that reason leads to a conclusion that I disagree with or find reprehensible, he's always going to feel one-dimensional. If you're not going to use this idea to try and come up with some kind of insight into how someone gets radicalized like this, despite having basically Elton's entire backstory, then I fail to see much of a point. I mean, sure, some people can be just bad. There wasn't much of a reason behind Roger Ap Gwilliam from 73 Yards being who he was, but the context of that story lent in this kind of ambiguous mystique, where you're never quite sure of just how real any of the 73 Yards timeline is. In Lucky Day, Conrad is just a person who's grown up to be like this for some reason. Which, okay, yes, as said, Alex Jones is. But just putting an Alex Jones-like character in a story can't be the start and the end of a commentary on this type of person, can it? Similarly with Ruby with her PTSD, in 73 Yards it's this full-on visual journey through Ruby's fear of abandonment, deftly using this woman as a representation of that fear. Here, Ruby basically just says she has PTSD a couple of times.
I think I'm in shock. Like PTSD.
And I feel like I'm back in the Chris Chibnall era. Hello, my name is Character. This is a thing that I'm going through and I feel this about it, and so you should as well. Kablam is quite an appropriate comparison to this one, because similarly in this, UNIT are the good guys. Conrad and his online movement are the bad guys. There's no presented reason for the bad guys to behave the way they do or think the way they do, and so the drama kind of falls flat. While yeah, you do feel vindicated as Kate lets the Shriek out of its cell and exit on to attack Conrad, you're almost going, yeah Kate, go on, let it eat him. You should stop and think, wait, they can't actually let it eat him, can they? Because that would go against UNIT's entire purpose to keep people safe from aliens. But you don't think that, because Conrad has been set up to be completely and totally irredeemably evil for no real reason. Because there's no visible journey that Conrad or any of his followers have gone on to reach the conclusion that UNIT is fake and the aliens are all paid actors in costumes. The Doctor just shows up when Conrad's locked up at the end of the story to go, "You're a bad boy, Conrad." I mean, sure, there's that little moment where Kate's told that she went too far, but it feels like an afterthought to me and not the nuance that I was looking for. Of course, yes, trying to offer some kind of nuance to online conspiracy theorists of the real world is hard. Alex Jones is completely and totally loathsome, and I get the impulse and enthusiasm to go, Alex Jones is loathsome. But the purpose of sci-fi, particularly sci-fi satire, has always been to offer insight into topics plaguing the real world, and they didn't really come out of Lucky Day with any kind of insight. I went in with the exact same level of understanding of online conspiracy movements that I had coming out. They're completely loathsome. Yes, I know they are. I already thought that. It wasn't a complete waste of time. I laughed a fair few times, and it was quite cathartic watching the Doctor deliver the "you're a bad boy" speech. But I just feel there was a lot more this episode could have said, but didn't. Next up is the story and the engine, which is another episode in which all the characters get stuck in one location for pretty much the entire runtime, and there's meta elements running throughout it. A common formula and theme this season. So the Doctor takes Belinda to a barbershop in Lagos, a random tiny establishment where he just feels like he belongs. This is the sort of beautiful little detail about the Doctor that I love, and it fits alongside the history of the character being this Time Lord from a stuffy, boring upper-class society who likes the smaller things in life, like jelly babies. He likes going to this random barbershop and hearing people's stories as they get their hair cut. It seems to humanise him to Belinda. She smiles and sees his genuine enthusiasm for something simple, and she lets her guard down following that initial period of mistrust. So he arrives at the shop and finds its patrons trapped inside with posters in the alley out the front claiming they're all missing. Turns out they're all being held hostage by this mysterious new barber and they can't leave. The shop now exists in two different places, here in Lagos and on the back of a giant spaceship shaped like a spider crawling through a web where these interdimensional gods exist. And the ship is powered by stories and they have to tell them while they're getting their hair cut, and it grows back when they're done. It's a pretty strange and idiosyncratic means of transportation, but an impressively imaginative one. There's some really beautiful imagery going on here, and so far as the high concept components go, I should theoretically love this episode, and I probably would if it were a Big Finish audio play. Because visually speaking, a large bulk of the runtime is the characters standing around dumping complex lore on each other. If I skip to a random timecode in the episode, I'm usually going to be looking at the Doctor, the barber, or another character standing and delivering a monologue to someone in the shop. The window that generates images to go alongside the story being told while someone's hair is being cut is pretty clever, but they don't really use it that much. I was really getting into it as I was watching the Doctor telling an ordinary story about Belinda helping a lady at the hospital. I was thinking maybe the Doctor and the other characters would use a mixture of stories told via this device to find a way out of the shop, maybe vanishing into the stories and linking them together in such a way that resolves it. But instead, the background characters just sorta spout the things that they were supposed to be doing before they got trapped in the shop, and then they kind of vanish into the background as the Doctor and the barber bounce back and forth about their gods and this web thing. If I was listening to this as an audio adventure, I'd be engaging with it in a different way, letting my imagination visualise this web and all this backstory with Abby and the fugitive Doctor, but because I'm watching it, and it's mostly in this one room, my eyes just sort of glazed over and I started to lose interest. Similarly, when Abby reveals her history with the Doctor and we have a soap opera reveal where it turns out she met the fugitive Doctor, we don't actually, see a scene of this happening, which I find really weird. A lot of people went nuts over the fact they got Joe Martin back to be the fugitive Doctor in that one shot, and maybe I would have done once upon a time, but it just seemed incidental really. A cool little nod rather than the be-all and end-all of this episode that people have been treating it as. And I will remind everyone here about this era's stated purpose to try and get newcomers on board with the whole new series numbering on a new platform. Could I see this little nod to the show's past encouraging the newer audiences to check out the older stuff? I don't know, maybe. But the Ruth Doctor didn't exactly make a big impact on the show. When I watched Series 1 back in the day, the episode Dalek encouraged me to go off and explore the classic show by hinting at all this backstory for the Doctor. I don't really see this achieving a similar effect. Granted, the Doctor saves the day with a clip show and we see all his faces again, which might be trying to do a similar thing. But personally, I don't see any of this working as well, especially since the show has been showing us all his past faces on a regular basis for years now. And as said, it's just a brief incidental detail. The Doctor's past with the Dalek was the main focus of that story, whereas this is basically a tangent, which is why it failed to excite me. And that's a similar case with multiple things that happen in the next story, which I am certain that almost everyone watching this video has been anticipating from the second they clicked on it. The Interstellar Song Contest. So, about 12 years ago, just the hint of the return of the Doctor's granddaughter Susan, a character with a completely different sense of mystique than any of the other past companions who've returned, probably would have had me salivating at the screen even just in the small doses that we get here where she randomly appears inside his head during a moment of high tension. There was a time when these hints at the wider backstory of the Doctor would have had my investment at its highest. Now, I'm just sitting here going, they actually got Carol Ann Ford back at last. That's pretty neat. Although I think my complete lack of leaning in and wanting to know more at these little glimpses is something more than just the fact it's too little too late for me. Susan just sort of randomly shows up and says, "Grandfather," occasionally. She's physically disconnected from the main plot, there's no hint at how or even if the Doctor's going to find her again, which he doesn't in the end. There's no kind of mechanic that gets her to physically enter the story. The cliffhanger is basically just the cloister bell and the episode going, "Oh yeah, remember the series arc about the Earth apparently getting destroyed?" There's not much of a reason for Susan to actually show up within the context of this story. It would have worked just as well without her, and so it felt like I was a kid having keys jingled in my face, rather than this being the triumphant vindication of something that I and other fans have been clamouring for years. Similarly, the reveal of Mrs. Flood as the evil time lady, the Rani from latter-day classic Doctor Who, was also kind of just there. After about a year and a half of teasing who is this mystery character, it was always going to be pretty hard to come up with the goods. But the Doctor's not even in the room when it gets revealed. No bits of her evil plan are revealed at this point. It's just kind of a moment of, well, here you go. Maybe it's just the fact they've run out of the big and impressive classic Doctor Who villains to do. I'm a kid on Christmas Day sat amongst a pile of toys. I've opened a Dalek, a Cyberman, 3 Sontarans, a pack of Silurians, and now I've opened a bathroom gift set. Oh, so, it's one of those. Gee, thanks. I know some of my long-time viewers are probably going to point me at this little joke video I made a few years ago, where I argue that the return of the Rani has been a long-running prospect that needs to be fulfilled. In fact, lots of people did point me to this. I woke up the morning after this episode dropped on streaming and had comments on it for the first time in years, which were how I had the reveal spoiled to me. But you might have missed that the point in that video was that the return of the Rani could only ever have just been a vague whimper of a series that's run through all the interesting things to do and is just ticking boxes of stuff that hasn't been done yet. Anyway, with those two bits out of the way, the Interstellar Song Contest is the sort of episode that I'm surprised the show didn't do years ago. I was reminded quite a lot of Voyage of the Damned throughout. Okay, so let's do the Eurovision Song Contest in space. I know this is going to sound really weird coming from me, given I'm a morbid, morose shit who's always arguing the show should be darker and nastier. But I kinda wish the Interstellar Song Contest was just a light-hearted fluffy episode about some aliens sabotaging a singing contest where the stakes were as low as possible. Maybe these saboteurs want to edit their song into the broadcast and win the contest or something. A lot of effort clearly went into those alien designs, and yeah, they look stupid, but that is kind of the point of Eurovision. And whenever one of the songs started, I felt myself a bit deflated when we cut away and go back to the plot. No, go on, show me the full song. If you're going to do this at all, go all out with it. Make it as camp and light and plotless as humanly possible.
Oh no, Doctor! Dugadoo's gone and lost his voice!
Quick, we need to find the largest throat lozenge in the universe. In terms of plot, this one is very much in the spirit of latter-day John Nathan Turner classic Doctor Who. This was the period when he was doing these cheesy, campy pieces about cannibalistic little old ladies and a monster made out of licorice all sorts. And sure, the show still had teeth there, but the reason I kinda wish it was as stupid and camp as possible was the point of this episode is a major downer in the exact same way as the point of Joy to the World, and it feels even more jarring here. So, this alien is a Hellion called Kid, who is enacting revenge for the corporation that sponsors the song contest for enslaving their planet for ingredients for this space honey. And Kid's solution is to kill all of the viewers of the song contest by broadcasting a delta wave. And as has been picked up by pretty much everyone, the whole thing with the planet and the sponsor is a commentary on the real life trouble that Eurovision has gotten into with regard to the Israel-Palestine conflict. I think the way they've set this up is a little bit less like Kablam from Series 11 than it might appear though, where it turns out the protester against the massive corporation destroying workers' rights actually wants to kill everyone, and the Doctor basically ends up shilling for the massive corporation in response because of Doctor Who's way too common morally black and white stance, where in this situation, protester bad, corporation good. In this case, the corporation is commonly understood to be bad, and we have the bad Hellion going against them with his plan of death on a massive scale, but we also have this good Hellion, Cora, who instead of Kid massacring trillions of people in an act of revenge, the Doctor stops him, Cora goes to sing, the universe hears her song, and is moved by her people's plight. Okay, I kind of see what you're trying to do there, death bad, peace good. That's been Doctor Who's core message for basically forever. The problem is that Doctor Who, as much as I love it, and as much as people may say it has boundless possibilities, the show just is a very limited platform. It's limited by its story of the week 45-minute long format and its formulas that mean it often lacks the scope necessary to deal with topics like this. The genocide in Gaza is a really heavy topic. I like political sci-fi, but the problem is that Kid is basically just presented as bad guy wants to kill people, Cora doesn't, so therefore is better. I don't spend much time with these people, I don't spend any time on their planet, I just don't know much about who they are or where they come from or the context of their plight beyond the vague stuff that they just stand there and say. Everyone got mad at this episode over the subtext because the text on top of it is thin and nowhere near fleshed out enough, and so in the end, it's not totally like Kablam. The corporation doesn't get defended, but it's similar in the way it presents itself as, here is situation analogous to real world thing with two possible choices. One is good, one is evil. Pick one. As with Conrad in Lucky Day, I just didn't get much of a sense of what led Kid to think the Delta Wave was the correct solution to take. Basically, trying to summarise the philosophical and moral dichotomy between the effectiveness of achieving change through violence versus benevolence was probably never going to be achieved through a 45-minute episode of a stupid campy sci-fi show about a singing contest in space. Which is why, as said, the plot about the space lozenge or something along those lines might have been more Doctor Who's speed at this point. When it comes to the scene that's pissed everybody off, here is my most charitable reading of what I think they were trying to do here. So, at the start, Belinda gets sidetracked from her pushing the Doctor to get her home as soon as possible, and she enjoys this futurist take on the Eurovision Song Contest. Based on this and the last episode, she starts to think the Doctor might be a good guy after all, and those initial doubts that she had in Robot Revolution were unfounded. They then get separated, and she sees him threatening the Hellion on the screen, and she says this.
And watch you freeze to death.
That's not him.
And then she walks in on him torturing Kid, and she realises, oh, I really don't know this guy at all, do I? The only problem is that this basically gets completely forgotten about by having to tie everything into a neat little bow at the end of the episode, leading us into the finale, so that kind of ends up not really being the main focus of the concluding scenes. I do think in an earlier draft that mistrust and the realisation of who the Doctor actually is was probably what they were trying to do here, because this kind of naturally follows on from that scene in Robot Revolution where she questions his sincerity and says that he's dangerous. They were probably going for something similar to the end of Dalek, where Rose sees a different side to the Doctor as the Doctor has this violent emotional reaction to the Dalek. But there's nothing personal tying the Doctor into this story of the Hellions, and so it just doesn't work. And also we need the Cloister Bell, the Ark to return, and the Rani and Susan and all this other stuff crowding out the character arc. And Dalek's ending was so effective because Rose is essentially the main character throughout the first half of Series 1. We just had a 2-part episode where she went home and we had a lot of context for who she is as a person. Belinda, by contrast, following those opening couple of episodes, kinda stops being a main character at all and gets relegated to supporting cast. This is not to say I don't still like Belinda. I was interested in her different perspective that she was bringing to the show, but there just isn't that much of it beyond her introduction. I was leaning in during this scene and was interested in how seeing the Doctor torturing Kid was going to change the dynamic. But then I realised, wait, it's finale time next week, isn't it? And she's probably getting kicked out of the TARDIS soon, right? Wait, so are we done with this arc where she starts out mistrusting the Doctor, slowly gets brought round, then remembers, oh shit, I really can't trust him already? Like with Ruby's search for her mother, if the focus of the character doesn't really take centre stage for most of the episodes of the season, then my investment is nowhere near as high as it should be when we see key moments like this. Especially since I've had Lucky Day breaking up the arc like this. The seasons are just too short, so there isn't enough meat to these arcs for either Ruby or Belinda. I could have gone on a journey with Belinda as she questions who the Doctor is. I wanted to. I really liked her and I really liked her perspective. I'm trying to feel something for her. Come on, I can feel a journey in there somewhere, but it's just not strong enough. And so I'd kind of lost interest by the time it goes, oh yeah, we're ending soon. Okay, better sound the Cloister Bell, finale time. Boom. So, here we are, Wish World. Now, while I enjoyed this one a lot, if I didn't admit that yes, it is a massive letdown for some pretty big and obvious reasons, I would be lying to myself. So the world has been reshaped into this strange idiosyncratic society where all houses look basically identical. And the Doctor and Belinda are now married, and they have a child. and they live this 1960s style British suburban nuclear family existence, where Conrad from Lucky Day acts as this big brother type figure on the screen in every house. Whenever anyone has doubts about the world and think it doesn't feel quite right, they get reported to some higher authority. Turns out the world is this way because it's been wished to be like this by Conrad, who has this idea of a perfect society that's based on an outdated stereotypical view of the past. This whole idea is very much in tune with a trend in online media that I've been observing for a while. You may be aware of the internet's fascination with so-called liminal spaces that got kicked off by the Backrooms creepypasta several years ago, and I'm really into this scene. I've played a bunch of Backrooms games, Pools is the best one. I've also watched this film Vivarium a few times. It's about a couple who move into this strange neighbourhood where all houses look exactly alike, and they get given this weird alien baby that they have to take care of. Horror trends come and go, and the current fascination of the genre appears to be with worlds made of corridors, hallways and swimming pools that feel familiar, but there's something wrong and eerie about them. That's what Wishworld is tapping into. The Doctor and Belinda's home kind of looks and feels like a life-size dollhouse. The Doctor's workplace is a repurposed unit set, so it looks familiar, but there's something wrong with it, and we know there is because we've been in this room before. We know it's not supposed to look like that. The detail of the Doctor and Belinda having this cupboard filled with the exact same mugs to replace their current ones whenever they break is just beautiful. This world is so richly detailed and stunning to look at. The set designers, effects artists, prop makers, all of them have put a lot of work into bringing this world to life, which is why it's so utterly infuriating that we spend barely any time exploring it. Start of the episode, I saw the Doctor open that cupboard and I saw all those mugs, and I was suddenly excited for what I was about to watch. Then he answered the door to Ruby and she just told him that something's up, and immediately my interest tanked. Oh, so the pace of this thing is going to be completely off, isn't it? Brilliant. Another film I would compare Wishworld to is The Truman Show, the classic Jim Carrey film about a man living inside a reality show where his entire life is curated by a TV studio, and the plot is about him realising that his world is fake. And the thing this episode probably should have learnt from The Truman Show is it takes quite a lot of work to get Truman to start questioning his reality. Even when doubts get introduced to him, he still finds all these psychological ways to keep living in denial until he reaches complete breaking point where denial is no longer a possibility. Truman's discovery that his world is fake is a slow process of unravelling various interlinked mysteries over the course of the runtime, and that really lets you sink into this world and explore it. Well, yeah, The Truman Show tells you up front that the world is fake. It's the process of discovering that that's important. Wishworld has similarly created a bunch of interlinked mysteries that it could explore, but it just doesn't for some reason. For example, the idea that disabled people are outcasts in this society because Conrad's limited perspective doesn't understand what their lives are like, so Shirley just finds she doesn't need her medication anymore. That's a very cool idea, but again, it's got the Interstellar Song Contest's problem of characters just telling me things rather than letting me follow them through their lives and understanding this new warped existence that's been foisted upon them. Imagine Shirley just waking up one day on the street, panicking as she realises, wait, how did I get here? I need my medication, and then slowly realising that she doesn't need it. Wait, what's going on? That doesn't make sense. And speaking of characters that we spend barely any time with, the sidelining of Belinda continues to the point where she's basically just a background character, which really hampers any sense of drama that Russell might have been going for here. She has the exact same story as Donna in Silence in the Library, where she gets given this fake reality as a suburban mother, and she has a couple of kids who aren't real. And as the simulation starts breaking down, the realisation that her kids aren't real and she can't hold on to them is this moment of pure horror for her.
But Mummy, sometimes when you're not here, it's like we're not here.
In Wishworld, the exact same thing happens, but it doesn't hit nearly hard enough. Because Belinda has had barely a scene or two in which to establish she is happy living her suburban mother existence, and she loves Poppy and she desperately wants to hold on to her even when she realises that she isn't real. I mean, I had basically no indication at all that Belinda was or wanted to be a mother throughout this season. If I did, then these scenes that we get in Wishworld would be enough, but this comes out of nowhere. Belinda becoming a mother basically becomes the biggest flaw in the following episode, which makes this angle of the story a central pillar of its plot. If you have basically nothing establishing the relationship between these two, then Why should I be invested? Because Poppy is a baby girl and Belinda is nominally speaking her mother, and those are good things? But you haven't done anything to get me emotionally invested in their relationship, so it just doesn't affect me one bit. Instead, Ruby's taking up half the runtime of Wishworld for some reason. It really wouldn't surprise me if Belinda was a last-minute addition to the season and it's been written around that and Ruby was meant to be the companion for 2 full seasons, because why else would she suddenly take the reins mid-story? Why would Belinda basically turn into supporting cast halfway through the season? I just don't think Russell has realised how big a deal Poppy is. The emotional reaction of a woman randomly getting given a daughter needs a lot more than what he's given us. Someone getting given a daughter by fantastical means and having to adjust to that is an entire season of television. In fact, it was. That's what season 5 of Buffy is about. And Buffy hammers the emotional impact of Dawn incredibly hard. How they find out that she doesn't belong, but she really feels like she does. This story just sort of drops Poppy on top of a pile of other broken ideas, expects you to accept it, and then just wanders away. All of these ideas could have hit so much harder if they just had room to breathe. I would have been invested in the Doctor figuring out the world isn't real, and he finally gets this message from Rogue and is told that tables don't work like that. This point where the Doctor realises that the world is wrong probably could have been the cliffhanger, as it provokes an existential crisis in the Doctor, but as it's all been squeezed together so tightly, barely any of it has any impact, and so Murray Gold's score has to blare out so loudly over this scene, desperate to make me feel the power of the realisation.
It's been a very long day. Why don't you come to bed?
Wait.
When I could have felt the sudden jolt of, yeah, of course this world isn't real, if most of these scenes could have just been allowed to run for as long as they needed to for the tension to start building. 45 minutes was not enough for this episode. It's so frustrating because Wishworld could have worked so well if it was just a standalone, disconnected, high-concept episode. But it isn't. It's part 1 of the finale. So at about the 30-minute mark, we need the Rani to start copiously explaining why she did all of this, and to bring back another classic Doctor Who villain, which I'm going to surprise you all by saying I thought was really well done. I mean, I've been waiting for such a long time for a Doctor Who showrunner to bring back everyone's favourite Doctor Who monster, the Chumleys. Just bravo, the Chumleys are my favourite Doctor Who monster. Literally everybody in the Doctor Who fandom has been asking for the return of the Chumleys for years, and I am so grateful that Russell finally brought them back. And you know what the Chumleys being in this means? This must be a hint that they found the missing episodes of Galaxy 4. Oh my god, I'm so hyped. Also, she's bringing back some other guy that no one cares about. What's his name? Omega?
Omega.
Oh, Omega, yes. Okay, seriously, like with the return of the Rani and the return of Susan, this just feels like box ticking. And like with the return of Sutekh last year, in terms of formula, Russell's first era finales were all surprise reveals of classic Doctor Who villains back when the show was newly rebooted and was very popular, and this formula just is dated by this point, because fans like me have worked through all the big and interesting ones that are going to excite us, and it's not going to mean anything to the newcomers or the kids because they're just not as big a deal as the ones that are much more easily action figurable. We don't even see Omega at the end of Wishworld. The Rani might as well have just said, "The 3 Doctors," and expected the fans to go, "Hooray, I like the 3 Doctors." It's the Mara Doctor. "Hooray, I like Kinder." It's the Horror of Fang Rock. "Hooray, she's saying names of old episodes that I like." And this feeling it was a box-ticking exercise gets completely validated in the final episode, The Reality War, where Omega basically spends the entire episode in the process of returning, as with the Time Lords in the End of Time Part 2, and then he gets dealt with basically immediately. Like with Susan, fans may have been asking for this for years, but he's only on screen for a few minutes, and isn't really anything like the Omega from the 3 Doctors. Although Omega's appearance didn't actually make me angry like you might think. I was actually howling with laughter throughout this scene, because it's almost like a parody of a Doctor Who monster return. And then Omega grabbed the Rani, and he ate her, and he gobbled her all up. Nom 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 nom. And then the Doctor grabbed the Vindicator, and he used it like a gun, and he blasted Omega back into his tomb. Blam, 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 blam. What even was this? So, after I managed to pick myself up off the floor, rehinge my unhinged jaw, and actually sat down and managed to think about whatever the fuck I just watched properly, the reality war actually bothered me quite a lot. I know my general attitude towards Doctor Who at this point is either cold detachment or bored indifference. At last season's final reveal, I didn't think there was anything wrong with revealing that Ruby's mother was an ordinary woman who did what she thought was right. The dramatic beats of those final scenes make sense. It's just the way it was done didn't justify the reveal not being the big deal that it was built up to be, so I understand why people were disappointed by it. Here, though, we set up that Belinda is independently minded and will call the Doctor on his shit, but by the end of the season, she has a kid with him, and the point of her character is that she wanted to get back home to see her kid.
I've got to be home for Poppy on May the 24th. If I'm not back by 7:30, I'm in trouble.
Okay, I kind of understand why Russell might want these series to act as mirrors to each other. Ruby's arc is that her mother is missing, Belinda's arc is that her child is missing. But was that her arc though? Really? There's basically nothing indicating that motherhood is important to Belinda, and I really like that a lot. Maybe it's just because I'm in my 30s now and I'm sick of being asked if I want to be a parent at some point, but I quite liked that we had this character who was about my age and who didn't want to be defined by her relationships with other people, and she enjoys helping people in her role as a nurse, and that's just what her life is. She likes it and wants to get back to it. There's nothing wrong with parenthood, but Belinda's life is, it's different. Not everyone needs to have the exact same life story. And I find it really odd how Wishworld is implying that there's something sinister about this one-size-fits-all life story that everyone follows in this reality.
It's all very clear. Good little girl, then good little wife, then good little mother.
Which is how I feel whenever people ask me, so are you going to have kids yet? Instead of, so are you going to have kids at all? But the finale just reverses on that completely and says, actually, the point of this series isn't that Belinda was looking at the Doctor from a different perspective. The point of this series was that Belinda needed to be convinced that the Doctor is good and being a parent is what her life should be about, which... Again, there's nothing wrong with parenthood. Some people want it, some people don't. But there's basically nothing at all in this season that indicates Belinda wants it. She just gets made to have it, and she has this bond with Poppy, and the plot of the reality war is she's desperate to make sure that Poppy continues to exist after the wish ends. Which just doesn't feel earned in any way, because we've had basically nothing of her life as a mother to establish why she desperately wants to hang on to Poppy. I'm just supposed to assume she wants this because babies are good. But Poppy isn't a character, she's just the idea of a child. By contrast with Silence in the Library and Forest of the Dead, the point of Donna is that she's a directionless, hopeless misfit whose mother is disappointed in her, and she gets given this conventional life story inside the computer world with a husband and kids. That works for her. This doesn't, because Belinda really didn't seem to have a spiritual hole inside of her that would be filled by becoming a mother. Also... Oh god, I have to go here, don't I? Okay. Like with the torture scene in Interstellar Song Contest and the Israel-Palestine subtext, I'm not saying there are definitive ugly intentions running underneath this, given that Russell outwardly projects progressive values all the time. The following subtext has probably come out because it's completely obvious that the reality war has been drafted and redrafted a billion times, and the original points it was trying to make probably got lost and warped beyond all recognition. But I have to point this out. Ruby says this about Conrad's vision of the world.
It could have been so much worse. A fantasy world, I'd expect guns and whiskey and girls, but yours is nice.
People just want to be safe and fed and warm. So that's what I did.
You tried to give everyone a family.
But Conrad also created a world with deeply entrenched homophobia.
But she's way out of my league. Oh, she's not. You're a beautiful man. Was that supposed to mean? No.
And that's nice, is it? Okay, yes, that is the uncharitable reading. That's obviously not what they're trying to say here. I know that what they're trying to do here is give some sort of dimension to Conrad. He's not doing this because he's purposefully evil, he's genuinely trying to do what he thinks is right, but what he thinks is right is fucked up, and people that he either doesn't care for or understand, like disabled people and LGBT people, get hurt. That does fix the problem in Lucky Day that made him a pantomime villain. He thinks this is the right way to be. A well-written villain has got to think that what they're doing is right. The problem I have is that Ruby's phraseology and Belinda's reaction to this new world means that the ultimate message coming out of it is that Conrad is right to make people live according to his worldview. It probably did sound completely different 700 drafts ago, but this is what it sounds like when you put all of this together. I just don't think it's been properly thought through what the implications of introducing this character in Belinda, making her out to be this independently minded person who calls the Doctor on his shit, and then fitting her inside of this little nuclear family box and making her desperate to stay there actually means. This is the complete opposite end of the story that I would have expected based on Robot Revolution. I would have imagined the end of this series being the Doctor finally gets Belinda back home so she can go to her shift on the ward and maybe say goodbye to an elderly patient who she's been seeing regularly who's dying of a terminal illness. That would make sense for her character. Yeah, the daughter thing is a surprise, I just don't see the journey that led to us giving her a daughter. The entirety of the Poppy stuff is easily the biggest problem with the episode, although it's hard to rank them in terms of importance. I'm probably going to put this one above Omega being a glorified cameo. Next problem down, I'd say, is spending about half the runtime with the characters just standing around explaining the plot to each other. While I thought The Well was a lot more than just, do you remember midnight? A huge chunk of the runtime in the reality war is all of the characters stood around in unit headquarters, probably so they can get as much use out of this big expensive set as possible, and Anita from Joys of the World is just standing there holding a door open while the other characters start going, yes Doctor, I remember the Rani, she was the most evil enemy we've ever faced. My father fought Omega in the 70s, do you remember that? Yes. Yes, Russell, I do remember that. I've been remembering the show for years now, and I'm completely sick of remembering it. Just the new stuff you've been coming up with would have been a much better thing to focus on. I didn't like Ruby at first, but she really grew on me by 73 yards. Belinda was great at first, and it's a shame she didn't get a focal episode like 73 yards. The Wish World was an amazing idea. The never-ending clip shows are just needless at this point. Anyway, so the Rani's plan is to bring back Omega to resurrect the Time Lords, because of course it is, what else was it going to be? Archie Panjabi is really giving it her all as the Rani, but all it really is just her delivering a series of monologues in alternating rooms before getting eaten, and the plot turning into Poppy disappearing out of existence after it looks like she stayed for long enough for everyone to have the rug pulled out from under their feet. And Ruby is the only one who remembers her for some reason, and she insists the Doctor has to save her. It's at this point where the Doctor goes inside the TARDIS alone that we drift into what was almost certainly reshot at last minute when Ncuti's decision to leave was made, because I am genuinely unconvinced that this was the plan all along because of how slapdash this resolution feels. So it turns out the Doctor has to start regenerating if he wants to realign reality to make it so Poppy still exists. I was expecting a surprise regeneration coming, not only because I'd heard the rumours that Ncuti was leaving and thought they were probably accurate because he's a much bigger deal now than he was when they cast him and is probably getting a bit too expensive to keep. I mean, it kinda sucks to do a surprise regeneration like this because the fans weren't emotionally ready for this Doctor's era to basically end when it feels like it just started 5 minutes ago. I was really hoping the regeneration would be open-ended because whatever happens next, the show just does need a long rest. Especially if we're still doing series finales that read like complete gibberish to anyone who doesn't have an encyclopedic knowledge of Doctor Who, or can see inside Russell's head and see the secret unwritten episode which gives any indication whatsoever that Belinda wants to be a mother. An open-ended regeneration that just showed him regenerating, fade to black, would mean we could go away for a few years, rest, regroup, rethink. But no, it turns out the rumours were true and he regenerates into Billie Piper for some reason. Which, don't get me wrong here, I like Billie as an actress a lot, and the idea of making her the Doctor is an interesting wildcard, but given the fandom is already in complete meltdown over literally anything that happens, Making Rose Tyler into the Doctor is just going to make that amorphous ball of rage even worse. And while yes, it may make a warped amount of sense to play to nostalgia like this, because as I said earlier, the only reason the 60th specials did better than usual was the ooh remember that factor, but this just is a continuing sign that the show genuinely doesn't have anything new to offer. And it's just too petrified of losing the fans that it still has left to try anything new and daring more often than every once in a while. Maybe she's going to be some sort of transitional Doctor like David Tennant 2 was? I don't know, and I wish Billy all the best, I really do, but the show just needs time away to regroup, let everyone cool off, and recover from the last few years. It's okay, Doctor, you can slow down now. Let's get you to bed. Let's get your eye mask on. Oh, that's nice. Is my granddaughter coming to see me soon? Yes, your granddaughter's going to be here. Everyone's coming to see you for your birthday. But it's alright. You can rest now, okay? Night night. Cheers for watching, everybody. In case you're unaware, I have a Patreon, just like everybody else. You can go and look at that if you want, links in the description. I'd like to thank the following people. Firstly, Roman Weston for giving me a joke and doing that Chumley bit. And an extra special thanks to the following generous people on my Patreon. A. Maxwell, Aidan Jenks, Alastair McPherson, Anirin Hunt, Becca W, Captain Grezza, Charlotte Discordia, Crispy, Quedgen, Dave Sanders, Father Brench, Ivy Kelly, Jack Moore, James Morgan Belcher, Jennifer Milligan, Joel, Max Kennedy, MB_8, Oxbow is Amstee, Robert Conley, Sabrina Wade, The Hickster, and Tony Thompson. Cheers everybody, see you next time.